Welcome to Revenge Blaze, the channel that brings you powerful real-life stories of family drama, betrayal, and ultimate justice. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you love stories where the truth finally comes out, where the underdog stands tall, and where karma works in quiet but undeniable ways, then you're in the right place. Stick around, don't go anywhere because today's story is one you won't want to miss. It's emotional, it's gripping, and it ends with a satisfaction that only real justice can deliver. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Today's story is titled, "They Called Me a Stray at the Party, but My Lawyer Revealed Who Really Owns This $1 Million Mansion." My name is Sophia Reynolds. The night of my grandfather's 90th birthday should have been one of celebration candles flickering across a long table, old stories being retold, glasses raised to a man who had built everything we stood on. Instead, it became the night my brother decided to remind everyone exactly where I stood. He rose with the microphone still warm from the earlier toasts, looked straight at me, and spoke words that sliced the room in half. "This room is for real family," he said, voice carrying over the music like a sudden drop in temperature. "Not strays who just wandered in off the street. Sophia, go find yourself a table in the yard. You don't belong here." The laughter came fast. Not cruel at first, just surprise, like they hadn't expected him to say it out loud. Then it grew, heads nodding, eyes flicking toward me with that familiar mix of pity and agreement. Aunts and uncles who used to slip me extra dessert when I was small now looked away. Cousins who once played tag with me in this very backyard now smirked into their wine. I felt every single stare like pins. The word stray wasn't new. It had lived in the corners of conversations for years, whispered when they thought I couldn't hear, joked about when they thought I was out of earshot. But tonight it was public. Official. A declaration in front of more than 100 people. I didn't shout back. I didn't storm out. I simply picked up my plate, walked through the glass doors to the patio, set it down on a small folding table under the string lights, and sat alone while the party rolled on inside without me. The cold air pressed against my skin, but it was nothing compared to the ache spreading in my chest. Later, when the catering manager approached with the final bill for the entire evening, $5,420, my brother followed close behind. He placed the envelope in front of me with the same easy confidence he'd worn all night. "Your share," he said loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Consider it thanks for being allowed to tag along all these years." They watched, waiting, expecting tears, maybe an argument, something they could use to prove their point. I took out my card, paid in silence, signed the receipt, handed it back. No scene, no drama, just the soft beep of the transaction completing. My brother turned back toward the house, victorious, already reaching for another glass of champagne. That's when the front door opened again. My lawyer stepped inside, suit, sharp folder in hand, expression calm, in a room that suddenly wasn't. The music lowered itself. Conversations faltered and died. My grandfather, seated at the head of the table in his wheelchair, lifted his chin just enough to meet my eyes across the distance. The lawyer cleared his throat once. "Before anyone leaves tonight," he said, voice carrying without effort, "there is something the entire family needs to understand about the legal ownership of this house, and about Mr. Walter Harper's final irrevocable decisions." Silence crashed down like a curtain. Smiles vanished. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Faces that had been so certain moments earlier now looked small, uncertain, almost frightened. They had spent the whole evening laughing, toasting, celebrating inside a house they assumed was still theirs. They had no idea it had belonged to me for years. If you've ever been made to feel like an intruder in the only home you've ever known, if you've ever sat at the edge of your own family and wondered whether you're even allowed to stay, then hit that like button right now, subscribe, so you don't miss a single word of what comes next, and turn on notifications. Because this isn't just a story about a birthday gone wrong. It's the moment everything they thought they controlled slipped out of their hands forever. Stay with me. You're going to want to hear how the table finally turned. The humiliation at the party wasn't random. It had roots that went back decades. I was 2 years old when the highway took my parents in one wet afternoon. My mother was Grandpa Walter's only daughter, his light he used to call her. After the funeral, the house on Lake Washington felt suddenly too big, too quiet. Douglas and Susan Harper took me in because duty demanded it, not because love invited it. They already had Ryan 7 and already carrying the effortless shine of the chosen one. Brooke came a year later, all dimples and easy affection, the child they'd waited for, without realizing they'd been waiting. I arrived as an afterthought, a small shadow trailing behind their perfect picture. The differences weren't loud at first. They were in the small, everyday cuts that bleed slow. Ryan's 10th birthday, a backyard full of kids, a shiny red BMX with black wall tires and streamers that caught the sun like flags of triumph. He tore around the lawn laughing while Douglas filmed every second on the old camcorder. My 8th birthday, 3 months later, Susan handed me a pair of off-brand sneakers from the discount bin. Practical, she said with a tight smile. You'll grow into them. I did grow right out of them, the soles wearing through, until I could feel gravel under my socks on the walk to school. I never asked for new ones. Asking earned the same weary exhale. Be grateful you have anything at all. School drew the lines sharper. Ryan went to Lakeside Academy, ivy-covered buildings, teachers who remembered your name, debate team trips to the state capitol. Brooke followed her ballet shoes, clicking across the hardwood floors of the studio downtown, recitals ending in standing ovations and armfuls of roses. I rode the yellow bus to the public middle school 2 miles down the hill. When I brought home a perfect report card, Douglas glanced at it over breakfast and said, "Good. Keep it up. We're not made of money. No celebration, no extra allowance, just the reminder that my place was earned, not given." Christmas photos were the cruelest mirror. Ryan and Brooke, always front row, arms linked, smiles wide and unforced. I hovered at the edge, half obscured by a garland or a poinsettia pot, my grin practiced in the bathroom mirror so it wouldn't look forced. One year, Susan cropped me out when framing the picture for the mantel. The frame was too small, she explained casually. I helped her hang it anyway, then stood in the hallway staring at the empty space where I should have been. Grandpa Walter never missed those absences. He lived in the big house back then, the same house that would later become mine, in ways no one else suspected. He didn't shout or demand change. He simply refused to let me vanish. Every Saturday he'd pull up in his faded green Buick radio tuned to Frank Sinatra, crooning low and steady. "Hop in, kiddo." We'd drive to the downtown library, windows downwind, carrying the smell of pine and lake water. He'd settle in the reading room with black coffee while I wandered the stacks, pulling books about girls who outran their circumstances or built empires from broken pieces. He never set a limit. 3 books, 5, 10. He just paid and waited. One rainy afternoon when I was 12, he parked by the water and handed me a slim envelope. Inside, a savings passbook with my name typed neatly at the top. The balance was modest, but it existed. "For when the world tries to tell you otherwise," he said, voice quiet but certain. Another time, he drove me to the community college just to pick up brochures, even though high school was still years away. "Dreams don't wait for permission," he told me. Those words lodged in my chest like a small warm coal. He never promised to rewrite the family rules. He just kept handing me proof that I wasn't invisible. By 25, I had my real estate license and a handful of rental properties I managed myself, hard-earned, no handouts. Grandpa had quietly transferred the Lake Washington house into a trust for me years earlier when Douglas and Susan were off on one of their cruises. A safety net, he called it. I called it the first place I'd ever truly belonged. Yet the family dinners, the holidays, the obligatory gatherings never shifted. I showed up. I smiled. I stayed on the edges. The ache of being the perpetual outsider had become familiar, almost companionable, like an old scar you forget until someone presses on it. I learned to smile through it, until I couldn't anymore. The evening unfolded with the kind of effortless elegance that money buys and habit polishes to a shine. Silver and gold balloons bobbed against the vaulted ceiling, catching glints from the old chandeliers Grandpa Walter had chosen himself back when he still trusted his own eyes on a ladder. A jazz trio piano bass brushed drums played low in the corner, the kind of standards that make people of a certain age close their eyes for a second and remember dances they haven't danced in 40 years. More than 100 guests moved through the living room and dining area, cousins who flew in from Tacoma, former partners from the real estate boom days, neighbors who'd watched the house age gracefully alongside them. The air carried roasted garlic warm bread, the faint bite of good scotch, and the comfortable murmur of people who believed they belonged exactly where they stood. I arrived early, same as always. I helped the caterers unfold the last tables, arranged Grandpa's favorite bottles on the bar cart, carried trays of crab cakes so the staff could catch their breath. No one asked. No one thanked. I was simply there, filling the spaces no one else noticed needed filling. Ryan glided through the crowd like he was born to command it. He clapped shoulders, retold the same golf story with the same punchline, laughed a beat louder than necessary, so everyone knew he was enjoying himself. Brooke drifted beside him, phone angled just so, capturing candid moments for the family Instagram she curated like a full-time job. Douglas and Susan held steady near the fireplace, accepting compliments on how beautifully the house had held up, as though they'd personally sanded the floors. I kept to the edges, refilling ice, clearing stray napkins, adjusting the blanket over Grandpa's knees when the lake breeze slipped through the open doors. He caught my eye once across the room and gave me the smallest nod, the one that said, "I see you, even if the rest don't." After the cake had been sliced and the candles blown out to warm, scattered applause, Ryan tapped the microphone. The trio eased off. Conversations quieted. He stood at the heart of the room, glass lifted, smile broad and practiced. "Tonight is about Grandpa," he said, voice carrying with the ease of someone who's never had to fight for attention. 90 years of building something real, a family, a legacy. This house. He paused long enough for the room to lean in, then turned his gaze straight to me. "But let's be honest. Some people are only here because they were taken in, not born into it. So this room, this moment, is for blood family only." A ripple of surprise, then soft laughter. Heads turned. Nods followed. Ryan pressed on louder, almost cheerful. "Sophia, why don't you take your plate outside? Find a spot in the yard. Strays don't sit at the family table." The laughter swelled first, startled, then approving, then comfortable. Brooke pressed her lips together to hide a grin. Susan exchanged a quick glance with Douglas that said, "Finally, someone said it." Aunts and uncles smiled, the indulgent smile reserved for boys being boys. Phones came out discreetly. A few guests even angled them toward the doors, ready to capture whatever came next. The word "stray" landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread outward, touching every face in the room. I felt them all. Every glance. Every quiet chuckle. Every silent agreement. Heat rushed to my face, then receded, leaving behind a cold, clear stillness. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out. I simply lifted my plate, half a slice of cake still on it, walked through the glass doors to the patio, set the plate on the small folding table beneath the string lights, and sat. The night air pressed cool against my skin. Inside, the jazz started again, softer through the glass. Laughter rose in waves, toasts rang out, silverware chimed against china. They carried on as though I'd never been part of the picture at all. I sat there for what felt like forever, but was probably 40 minutes. No one came out. No coat was brought. No apology. I watched fireflies pulse over the dark lake and counted slow breaths until the raw burn in my chest hardened into something sharper, steadier. The catering manager eventually appeared on the patio, shifting from foot to foot. He held the final invoice, $5,420 for the full evening food, open bar staff, everything. Miss Reynolds, he said quietly, almost apologetic. The total is here. Mr. Ryan asked that it be given to you. Ryan stepped out right behind him, hands in pockets, expression loose and satisfied. Your share, he said, dropping the envelope on the table loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. Fair contribution. Thanks for being here. Eyes from inside pressed against the glass, curious, expectant. Some phones were still raised. I looked at the number, then at Ryan, then at the faces framed in the doorway. I opened my purse, took out my card, swiped it through the reader on his phone. The approval beeped, small, final. I signed the digital receipt with a hand that didn't shake. Handed the phone back. No scene, no outburst, just the quiet end of a transaction. Ryan's smile stretched wider. He turned back toward the house, already reaching for the champagne flute someone passed him through the open door. That's when the front door opened again. My lawyer stepped inside, suit crisp, folder in hand, face calm amid the sudden hush. The receipt burned in my pocket like a promise. Then the door opened again. The party ended like a door slammed shut. Guests left in hurried waves, coats snatched from the hall closet, goodbyes exchanged in low, awkward tones, headlights slicing across the driveway as engines turned over too loudly in the sudden hush. The jazz trio packed their stands without a note of farewell. Caterers moved like ghosts, folding tables, stacking plates, erasing every trace of celebration until the house felt stripped bare. Balloons still hovered near the ceiling, but the room had shrunk, the air thinner. I waited on the patio until the last taillight vanished, then slipped back inside through the side door. Grandpa Walter sat by the dying fire in his wheelchair blanket drawn to his chest, face lined with exhaustion, but eyes sharp as ever. Benjamin Klein stood beside him, folder tucked under his arm, posture calm in a way that made the rest of us look small. Ryan paced by the bar cart, fingers drumming the wood. Brooke perched on the sofa, arms wrapped tight around herself. Douglas and Susan lingered near the stairs, faces frozen in the careful neutrality people wear when they sense the ground shifting but can't yet see how far it will drop. Benjamin opened the folder with a quiet, deliberate sound that cut the silence sharper than any shout. Mr. Harper requested my presence tonight for one purpose, he said, voice even professional, the same tone he used when sealing deals that changed lives. Certain facts about title and estate must be stated clearly before anyone leaves this property. He placed the first document on the low table, clean, notarized, dated more than a decade ago. The Lake Washington residence, Benjamin continued without flourish, has been held in irrevocable trust for Sophia Reynolds since she turned 21. Title transferred legally at that time. This house is hers. Susan's breath caught audibly. Douglas's knuckles whitened on the banister. Ryan froze, mid-step. Benjamin laid out the next stack: bank statements, withdrawal logs, a ledger of transfers that spanned nearly 30 years. Furthermore, he said Sophia's parents established a trust fund of $600,000 solely for her care, education, and future. Those funds were withdrawn over time. The records are precise: Ryan's tuition at Lakeside and his master's program, Brooke's year abroad in Europe, her design workshops in Manhattan, renovations here, the kitchen remodel in 2008, the dock in 2015, the new roof in 2020. Every dollar accounted for. Every dollar taken from what belonged to Sophia. The fire popped once. That was the only sound for several seconds. Ryan slammed his palm down on the bar cart. Bottles rattled, a glass tipped and rolled. This is outrageous, he snapped. You're twisting everything. Grandpa's not thinking clearly. Brooke's voice cracked. We didn't take anything. We thought it was for all of us. Family money. That's what you always said. Douglas stepped forward, face darkening. You're accusing us of theft based on old paperwork? Grandpa Walter lifted his hand, thin, trembling slightly, but commanding in its stillness. His voice came out quiet, worn thin by illness, yet carrying the weight of every decision he've ever made that no one else had the courage to make. I knew, he said. I waited. I gathered proof. I waited until the truth could no longer be ignored, and I waited until Sophia was strong enough to carry it. He turned his gaze to me. The firelight caught in his eyes, softening the lines around them. You were never astray, Sophia. He whispered, the words landing like a hand on my shoulder after years of empty air. You were always my daughter's daughter, always mine. Those words pierced something deep inside me, something I'd kept locked away so long I'd forgotten it could still bleed. Not joy, not yet. Just the sudden aching recognition that someone had seen me all along. Ryan's shoulders sagged, the fight leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. Brooke covered her face, shoulders shaking. Douglas stood, rooted mouth working soundlessly. Susan turned toward the window, staring at her own reflection as though it might offer an explanation. Benjamin slid copies across the table. The will was revised last month. Mr. Harper's entire estate, Harper Properties Holdings cash reserves, passes to Sophia. No provisions for others. The trust misuse is documented and actionable. Repayment with interest will be required. The house is already hers. Legally. Finally. Silence settled, heavy, broken only by the fire's soft collapse. Ryan laughed, once harsh, hollow. You think this holds will contest it. You can't just erase us. Grandpa shook his head, slow and final. I'm not erasing anyone. I'm returning what was taken, and I'm giving Sophia what she was always owed. I stood there, hand still in his, feeling the shift in the room not as victory, but as gravity realigning. The weight I'd carried, the one that made every doorway feel borrowed, every chair temporary, lifted just enough for me to breathe deeper. Grandpa squeezed my fingers, once weak but certain. You've earned every inch of this ground, he murmured. Not because they took from you, because you never let them take who you are. The next morning, the calls started. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter before the first light hit the lake. Ryan's name flashing like a warning. Text after text landed in rapid succession. This isn't over. We're coming for everything. You've ruined us. I scrolled once, felt the familiar twist in my gut, then muted the thread. Brooke followed minutes later, paragraphs of wounded prose. How could you betray the man who gave you everything after all the years we tolerated you? The word tolerated stung more than the rest. I forwarded the thread to Benjamin and turned the screen face down. By midday, Douglas and Susan's lawyer had emailed a crisp PDF on thick virtual letterhead demanding an immediate meeting to address the clear evidence of coercion and diminished capacity. The language was polished legal, but the intent was raw. They were circling, looking for blood. The story broke the next day. A local morning show ran Ryan's interview first. He sat under bright studio lights, eyes glistening, voice trembling just enough to sell sincerity. We raised her like our own, he said, pausing to swallow hard. We gave her a home when she had none. And now she's taken advantage of Grandpa's illness to rewrite our entire future. This isn't right. It's heartbreaking. The clip looped across feeds. Brooke posted a carousel on her Instagram, old family photos where I was always at the edge, faded color shots from holidays I barely remembered, with captions that read like wounds. When the person you welcome turns on you. Hashtag family first. Hashtag betrayal. Hurts. Likes and comments flooded in. Unbelievable. She's always been ungrateful. Classic outsider move, steal the fortune and play victim. Tabloids amplified it overnight. Headlines blared granddaughter's shocking claim, adopted heir, accused of exploiting dying patriarch. Grainy photos of me appeared loading groceries into my car walking down the street, framed as evidence of a secret life funded by ill-gotten gains. Anonymous tips fed reporters. She pressured him constantly. He was too weak to say no. Strangers online dissected my face in screenshots, deciding I looked calculating, cold, guilty. One night the phone rang from a blocked number. The voice was male, low, deliberate. "Drop it, Sophia. Walk away quietly, or we'll make sure the world knows every detail about you, things even Grandpa didn't know." I ended the call without speaking. The threat hung in the dark room like cigarette smoke I couldn't wave away. The noise became a constant hum. Reporters left voicemails on the house line. Neighbors who used to wave now looked away when I passed. Old classmates texted, just checking in with questions laced with judgment. I stopped answering the door. I stopped turning on the television. The world had cast me as the villain in their favorite kind of story, the outsider who dared to claim what was hers, and they were savoring every twist. Through it all, Grandpa faded. The cancer had been stage 4 for months, but now the decline was merciless, skin, thinner than paper breaths, coming in shallow pulls, hands always cold when I held them. He refused hospitals, refused to leave the house. "This is where I belong," he said one afternoon, voice a rasp. "Here. With you?" I sat by his bed that evening, the lake black outside the window. He reached for my hand, fingers fragile but insistent. "They're screaming because the truth hurts them," he whispered. "But truth doesn't need volume. It needs time." He paused, gathering air. "I've told Benjamin to prepare the full disclosure. The bank records the medical affidavits proving I was lucid when I signed the press statement. We put everything in the open. No more shadows." I looked at him, diminished, dying, yet still the strongest person I'd ever known, and felt the anger that had been burning low flare into something clearer, colder. Not vengeance, not bitterness. Just the quiet realization that I had spent a lifetime protecting their comfort by staying silent, and silence had never once protected me. The headlines painted me as the thief. But every lie they told only sharpened the truth inside me. I wasn't stealing. I was taking back what they stole first. We spent the following days in a quiet rhythm of preparation that felt almost sacred. Benjamin came every afternoon with folders thick as family albums, cross-referenced bank statements, transfer logs annotated in red ink, medical affidavits from 3 separate neurologists, affirming Grandpa's lucidity on the day he signed the revised will. We worked at the long dining table that had once held Thanksgiving turkeys and birthday cakes, now stripped to bare wood and truth. Grandpa watched from his recliner, oxygen humming softly, occasionally lifting a finger to point out a detail. "Make sure they see the dates on the withdrawals. Facts don't lie." I felt the fear that had coiled in my stomach since the headlines began to uncoil, not vanish, but loosen its grip. Each document we reviewed was a small reclaiming. I was no longer waiting for permission to exist in my own story. The press conference was held in a modest downtown hotel ballroom. Neutral, unpretentious, no family, silver or chandeliers. Benjamin set it up with precision, a single long table displaying the evidence like exhibits in a trial, chairs for reporters, a podium with a microphone. No theatrics. Just clarity. Grandpa insisted on attending, though the effort cost him. He sat at the side in his wheelchair blanket tucked around his legs, face ashen but composed. I stood beside Benjamin, heart steady for the first time in weeks. The room filled quickly, local anchors with notepads, cable stringers with cameras online, journalists with phones already recording. The air carried the faint scent of hotel coffee and nervous energy. Benjamin spoke first, calm and measured. "We are releasing today the complete documentation of Mr. Walter Harper's estate decisions and the history of the trust established for Sophia Reynolds by her late parents. All materials are public and available for immediate review." He stepped back. I took the podium, fingers resting lightly on the edges. For most of my life, I said voice clear, I lived in a home where belonging was conditional. I was thankful for safety, for shelter. But the trust my parents left, $600,000, meant for my care and future was quietly redirected over decades. I never demanded more than what was rightfully mine. Today, that is all I seek. I met the cameras one by one. I'm not here to tear down a family. I'm here to rebuild what was taken from me. The medical records confirm Grandpa's competence. The financial records show where the funds went. That is the full story. Questions flew sharp, insistent. What do you say to accusations of manipulation? Why publicize now? I answered each with the same quiet precision. No defensiveness, no tears, just facts. Then the double doors at the rear flew open. Brooke stormed in, cheeks flushed, mascara already tracking down her face. She shoved past a tripod, voice cracking the room open. "This is all lies," she cried, pointing straight at me. "He manipulated a dying man. We deserve that money. We raised her. We gave her a life." Cameras whipped around. Phones flashed. The room exploded in murmurs and shudders. Brooke's face contorted, rage, grief, desperation colliding. "We deserve it," she shouted again, voice breaking on the last word, almost a plea. "We deserve it." Security moved in smoothly, guiding her toward the exit. She resisted, still calling out until the doors swallowed her voice. The clip was everywhere before the conference ended. "We deserve it" looped across every platform, replayed in slow motion, memed with ironic captions dissected in comment threads. Some saw entitlement. Others saw a mask slipping. But no one could erase those 3 words. They unraveled decades of curated family harmony in a single, raw moment. The family countersued within hours, allegations of undue influence, elder coercion, incapacity. Their attorney stepped outside the courthouse for a brief statement. "This is a profound injustice. We will prove in court that Mr. Harper lacked the capacity to make these decisions." The reporters swarmed, feeding the cycle. I watched the coverage from Grandpa's bedside. He lay propped on pillows, oxygen tube taped under his nose, remote resting on the blanket. The muted TV showed Brooke's outburst again. He watched in silence, eyes tracing her face on the screen. She finally said it out loud. He whispered, almost sorrowful. "They always believed it. Now the world believes it too." I took his hand. The room felt smaller, the stakes higher, the air thicker with what was coming. The courtroom date came faster than anyone expected. King County Superior Court, gray stone steps worn smooth by generations of people carrying burdens heavier than theirs. We entered through the accessible side door. I pushed Grandpa's wheelchair down the quiet corridor, Benjamin walking beside us, briefcase swinging like a pendulum. Grandpa's oxygen concentrator hummed a soft, steady rhythm against the silence. His hand rested on mine, on the handle, cold fingers, but the grip still carried the quiet strength that had anchored me for decades. Inside Department 7, the air was thick with anticipation. Wood-paneled walls absorbed sound, high windows let in pale winter light. The benches were half-filled, reporters with notepads, a few locals who'd followed the story, the faint rustle of paper and shifting feet. Across the aisle sat Douglas, Susan, Ryan, and Brooke. Their attorney's silver-haired, tailored suit voice, honed for courtrooms, rose first. "Your Honor," he said, smooth and measured, "this matter turns on vulnerability. An elderly gentleman in advanced illness subjected to prolonged influence by a dependent who stood to gain everything. The evidence will demonstrate coercion, diminished capacity, and a will that does not reflect Mr. Harper's authentic wishes." He gestured toward Grandpa. "We respectfully ask the court to set aside the recent revisions and restore the original distribution." Benjamin stood. No flourish, just calm precision. "The record will speak clearly," he said. He presented the medical affidavits, first 3 neurologists, independent, unanimous, Grandpa's cognition sharp on the signing date. Then the financial trail, $600,000 traced dollar by dollar, Ryan's private school tuition, Brooke's European semester, and New York workshops the kitchen remodel the dock extension. Witnesses followed accountants who'd seen the transfers, neighbors who'd witnessed years of quiet exclusion. Each piece added weight, unemotional, irrefutable. Benjamin dimmed the lights a fraction and cued the video. The screen filled with Brooke at the press conference, face flushed, voice cracking. "We deserve that money. We raised her." The words rang through the courtroom speakers, raw and unedited. Brooke sat frozen across the aisle, color draining from her cheeks, as her own desperation played back to her. Ryan stared at the floor. Susan pressed knuckles to her lips. The clip ended. The room exhaled as one. I took the stand last. The bailiff swore me in. The microphone amplified my heartbeat. I never sought their fortune. I said, voice low, but steady. For 30 years, I sought only to be seen as someone who belonged, not as a guest who overstayed. I was thankful for the shelter, the safety. But gratitude doesn't erase theft. I stood silent through the reminders, the edges of every photograph, the spaces left empty where I should have been. Today, I stand here, asking only for what my parents intended when they left me that trust. Nothing more, nothing less. The silence afterward felt vast, like the courtroom itself was waiting for permission to breathe. Judge Morrison's silver hair, pulled back eyes that had seen every shade of human truth, reviewed the binders in front of her. Minutes stretched. She asked a few precise questions. Then she set the papers down. Having examined the medical evidence, the financial documentation, the testimony, and the video record, she said, voice clear and final, "This court finds the will valid and executed with full testamentary capacity. The trust misappropriation is substantiated. Defendants are ordered to repay $600,000 principal plus accrued interest totaling $1.8 million. Judgment for the plaintiff." The gavel fell like a door slamming shut on the past. Across the room, their world cracked open. Douglas collapsed forward, head in his hands. Susan buried her face against his shoulder, body shaking with silent sobs. Ryan stared ahead, expression hollow, as though the verdict hadn't yet reached the part of him that still believed he was untouchable. Brooke surged to her feet. "No. This is fraud. She's nothing but bailiffs," moved swiftly, each taking an arm as she struggled, voice rising to a broken wail that echoed down the marble hallway until the doors closed behind her. I sat motionless, tears slipping down my cheeks. Not from grief, but from the sudden, overwhelming lightness of being seen. Finally. Completely. Grandpa reached across the space between us and took my hand, his fingers thin, trembling slightly, but warm with pride. "You were heard," he whispered. "And you were enough." Outside, the sun hit my face differently. Grandpa squeezed my hand one last time. He passed 3 weeks later in the quiet hours before dawn. No dramatic last words, no gathering of family. Just the soft rhythm of his breathing slowing until it stopped. I stayed beside him until the hospice nurse arrived, then sat alone in the room as the first light crept across the lake. Grief arrived not as a wave, but as a deep, steady ache, like the house itself had exhaled and left a hollow where his presence used to be. I didn't cry then. The tears came later in private when I found his old Frank Sinatra record still on the turntable, needle resting in the groove where My Way ended. I kept the farewell simple. No public service, no announcements beyond a brief notice in the local paper. I scattered a portion of his ashes at sunrise from the dock he'd rebuilt himself decades ago, the water turning liquid gold as the sun rose. The rest I kept in a small urn on the mantel next to the photo of my mother he always kept there. It felt complete, private, his. Afterward, I severed every remaining tie. Ryan's emails, long accusatory, sometimes pleading, deleted unread. Brooke's messages blocked mid-sentence. Douglas and Susan's final lawyer letter shredded without opening. I changed the gate code, updated the security system, forwarded all unknown calls to voicemail that went straight to delete. No explanations, no goodbyes, They had made their choices years before the gavel fell. I made mine. The fallout unfolded in the months that followed, not with spectacle, but with the slow, grinding certainty of consequence. Ryan's marriage ended quietly. His wife filed without contest, citing irreconcilable differences that the tabloids never needed to invent. The real estate firm he'd run into the ground filed for bankruptcy clients vanished after the headlines partners withdrew debts mounted. He sold the downtown condo at a steep loss and moved to a one-bedroom rental in a quieter part of town. Brooke's career in marketing imploded. Major brands dropped her after the press conference clip resurfaced in industry forums. She drifted through freelance work, then silence. Douglas and Susan liquidated what they could to satisfy the judgment: the Whidbey Island cabin, the stock portfolio, the second car. They moved into a modest townhouse in a suburb they once would have driven past without a glance. No dramatic ruin, just the steady shrinking of lives built on borrowed ground. I channeled the estate into the Walter Reynolds Foundation, focused entirely on foster and adopted youth. College scholarships, emergency housing funds, mentorship for kids transitioning out of care. In the first year, we supported 47 young people, tuition-paid apartments secured, futures opened. The office walls now hold photos of those first graduates, teenagers in caps and gowns, arms around each other, smiles wide and unguarded. No press releases, no fanfare, just lives changed quietly. A year later, I stood on the balcony of the Lake Washington house, the same balcony where I used to sit alone during family dinners, watching the water while laughter drifted from rooms I was never fully invited into. The sunset spilled across the lake in rose and amber, the air carrying the faint scent of pine and lake water. Grandpa's voice came back to me, soft as the evening breeze. The best revenge isn't tearing them down. It's rising in the space they never thought you'd fill. I no longer carried hate. Hate is heavy, and I'd spent enough years carrying things that weren't mine. Forgiveness wasn't offered either. It would have felt like betraying the child who spent decades proving she had value. I simply walked forward carrying the truth instead of the scar. What I learned finally is both simple and hard-won: belonging isn't something others give you. It's something you claim quietly, persistently, until the world has no choice but to see it. Justice rarely arrives with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives with a gavel, a signature, and the slow turning of pages in a ledger. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a scholarship check cashed by a kid who finally believes they deserve to dream. And sometimes the truest freedom is closing a door without looking back, not because you won, but because you no longer need to prove you were right. If you've ever felt like you were standing on the outside of your own story, looking in through a window you weren't allowed to open, hear this: the lock isn't permanent. You hold the key. Turn it. Step inside. Build the life they never imagined you could. Fill it with people who see you clearly without conditions. And never apologize for claiming the space that was always yours. The lake lay calm below me, reflecting the last light of day. I took a deep breath and walked inside. Thank you for listening to this story on Revenge Blaze. If it touched you, if it reminded you that justice can still prevail, and that your worth is never defined by how others treat you, please leave a like, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe so you never miss our next powerful tale. We'll be back soon with another story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Until then, take care and remember, your story matters.